The paw prints smeared across the inside of the car window looked almost deliberate, like a message written in a language no one could read. Troy Bennett squinted under the harsh Mesa, Arizona sun, the heat hitting his face like a furnace blast as he stepped out of the air-conditioned hardware store. It was the kind of day when asphalt blurred into liquid, the kind that melted plastic dashboard covers and made your lungs ache. He would have walked right past the crookedly parked silver sedan if not for the way it sat, tilted, isolated, like it had been dropped in the lot by mistake. No movement, no sound, no shade. Then something shifted behind the tinted window. A flicker, a shape. Troy paused. He thought it was just his own reflection at first, distorted by sweat and sunlight. But then he saw it. Two small paws pressed against the glass from the inside, high up, like the animal had been trying to stand, to call out, only it hadn't made a sound. There were more. Dozens of prints, some smeared down the glass like they'd slid, others overlapping, frantic, the kind of marks that didn't happen all at once, but over time, long, painful time. And there she was, a German shepherd puppy, maybe 4 months old, though it was hard to tell through the heat haze. Her fur was soaked, her tongue hanging out dry and pale. She wasn't barking, she wasn't crying, she was just watching. Silent, frozen in a moment that looked far too old for a creature so young. Troy felt something in his chest shift. He wasn't a dog person, not in the sentimental way. His job as an HVAC tech kept him busy, and his small 2-bedroom rental didn't exactly scream pet-friendly. But this wasn't about dogs. This was about suffering, abandonment, a kind of betrayal you didn't need words to understand. He stepped closer, boots crunching on the scorched gravel, shielding his eyes with one hand. The puppy didn't move. Her gaze followed him, slow, like her body couldn't keep up. She lowered her head, resting it against the window, and closed her eyes. Troy dropped to a knee beside the car door. "Hey there," he said softly. "Hey, girl, stay with me." Nothing, just the thrum of distant traffic and the low hum of the sun overhead. He yanked on the door handle. Locked. He tried the other 3. Same. Every handle burned his skin. He backed up, eyes scanning the lot. Just a dry cleaner with its gates down, a shuttered vape shop, and a single pickup parked across the way. No one else in sight. His heart pounded. He fumbled for his phone and called 911, rattling off the location, the make of the car, the plate. "There's a dog," he said. "In the back seat. It's alive, but barely." The dispatcher assured him help was on the way. "Just stay there, sir. Do not break the glass unless the animal appears unresponsive." Troy looked back at the puppy. Her sides were moving, but barely. Each breath was shallow, like a fight against gravity. Her paws, once pressed so firmly to the window, now slid down slowly. Her nails made a soft, scraping sound as they fell. He cursed under his breath and sprinted to his work truck. There was a wrench under the passenger seat. He grabbed it, ran back, raised it high. Then he stopped. The angle of the glass. The position of the puppy. If he shattered it wrong, shards could hit her directly. Her face was so close. He dropped to his knees again, pressed his forehead to the hot door. "Just hold on," he whispered. A man in slacks walked by, glancing briefly at the scene. "It's just a dog," he muttered, shaking his head. Troy turned, fury boiling. "She's a puppy." The man kept walking. Troy swallowed the heat rising in his throat and looked back at her. "You're not just a dog," he said. "I see you." For the first time, her ear twitched. He kept talking, told her his name, that he worked with compressors and vents, that he had a broken ceiling fan he'd been meaning to fix, that maybe, just maybe, he could fix more than machines if she'd just hold on. Then sirens. Faint at first, then growing. fire and rescue. Troy stood up and waved both arms as the red truck screeched into the lot. 2 firefighters jumped out, one carrying a wedge tool, the other already reaching for gloves and a scanner. "Back seat?" one asked. Troy nodded, breathless. "She's not moving." The man with the wedge jammed it into the top of the door, working fast but steady. The other peered through the fogged window. "She's fading," he said, half to himself. "Dehydrated. Tongue's pale. We've got minutes." Population. The door unlocked with a dull click, and a wall of heat burst outward. The inside of the car felt like an oven left on high. The firefighter leaned in and gently scooped the puppy up with gloved hands. She didn't resist. Didn't flinch. He turned and looked at Troy. "Can you ride with us?" Troy blinked. "Me? She knows you." The puppy sagged in his arms like melted wax. Troy stepped forward and took her, cradling her against his chest. She was so hot he nearly dropped her. Her fur steamed under his shirt. Her breath came in short, almost imperceptible pants. Then, barely, a whimper. Not pain, not panic. Something else, relief. She knew someone had come. Troy looked down at her, and for a second, the heat, the crowd, the world, everything disappeared. "You're not alone," he whispered. The firefighter guided him into the back of the rescue vehicle. "Let's go," someone said. Doors slammed shut. As they pulled away, no one noticed the message on the glass. The streaked paw prints, desperate and raw, still glinting in the sunlight. Still there. Still waiting to be read. Troy Bennett had learned a long time ago that some silences stayed with you. He was 16 when his first dog, Buddy, died. A black lab mix with too much energy and not enough caution. They'd been inseparable, the kind of kid and dog bond that felt invincible. Until the afternoon, Buddy chased a ball into the road and didn't come back. Troy had been the one holding the leash, the one who let go. Afterward, his father had said, "It's just a dog." And maybe that's when Troy started learning how to lock things away. Regret, blame, grief. That single second of loosened grip haunted him more than he ever admitted. But now, as he cradled the limp German Shepherd puppy in the back of the rescue vehicle, the heat still radiating off her body, the silence returned. Not the silence of noise missing, the silence of something sacred. She wasn't moving much. Her head rested against his chest, and her breaths were shallow, wispy, like she wasn't convinced staying alive was worth the effort. Troy kept talking. Not in full sentences, more like murmurs, low and steady. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he talked anyway. About the breeze outside, about the cold water waiting at the shelter, about second chances. The firefighter across from him glanced at the monitor hooked to the IV. No words, just a nod. Troy stared down at her and saw the shape of her left ear, slightly bent at the tip, like it had been stepped on or crimped. He whispered, "You've got fight in you, don't you? I can feel it." The puppy didn't answer. She didn't need to. When they arrived at the Chandler County Animal Rescue Center, a young vet tech named Mia was already waiting at the back door, clipboard in hand. She didn't hesitate, just reached out and gently took the puppy from Troy's arms. "We'll take it from here," she said, then added more softly, "You did good." Troy stood frozen for a moment, arms empty, palms still burning faintly from the heat of the pup's fur. He followed them through the double doors without asking. No one stopped him. Inside was cool, too sterile at first, but it didn't matter. His focus stayed locked on the small form being laid onto a metal table lined with towels. 2 more staff moved around her quickly. IV tubes, saline, cooling pads. Someone said, "Rectal temps 106. Someone else muttered, "Pad burns, both front paws." The words barely registered. The puppy didn't cry. She didn't resist. But when the vet inserted the first line of fluids, her paw twitched just once. "She's still with us," Mia said. "Barely, but she's here." That was when it hit Troy. She hadn't made a single sound since he found her. Not a bark, not a whimper. Just that stare, so long, so deep, it felt like it had reached inside him and found something he'd buried. He stepped back as they worked and leaned against the wall. His hands shook now, a delayed tremor he hadn't noticed until the adrenaline wore off. He clenched them into fists, then let them go. "Is she going to make it?" he asked. His voice cracked. The attending vet, a petite woman with streaks of grey in her braid, looked up. "We're giving her every chance. Dogs are tough, but heatstroke's a beast. She's young, though. That's in her favor." Troy nodded. "What's her name?" The woman paused, then looked over her shoulder. "She doesn't have one. No chip, no collar. If she had someone before, they didn't care enough to be found." Something about that twisted in his gut. I think her name might be Ember," Troy said, without fully knowing why. "Like the last glow of a fire, still burning." The vet blinked, then smiled. "Ember it is." They placed her in a quiet recovery room, hooked up to fluids, wrapped in damp cloths to bring her temperature down. Her body looked even smaller in the kennel, dwarfed by machines and shadows. Troy stood outside the glass panel, staring. He could have left. He should have. But something about the way Ember's ear twitched when he whispered made it impossible to turn away. A staff member offered him water. He waved it off. Instead, he sank into the bench in the corner of the waiting area, hands clasped, elbows on knees, and let the silence sit with him. For the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. He remembered Buddy then, how he used to follow Troy room to room, how he'd rest his head on Troy's shoe when he was sad. And he remembered the weight of the leash in his hand, the guilt, the moment it slipped. Ember had pressed her body against the glass, not to cry out, but to be seen, to try one last time to connect before giving up completely. Troy had almost walked right past her. Almost. He closed his eyes and let out a breath that shook too much for his liking. Down the hall, one of the vet techs called out, "She's stabilizing." Pulses faint but consistent. He didn't realize he'd stood until he was already at the window again. Inside, Ember didn't open her eyes, but she shifted slightly, her front paw twitching against the towel, her nose turning faintly toward him. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're doing good, girl." His reflection in the glass stared back at him. Hairline damp, shirt stained with sweat. But it wasn't him he was looking at. It was her. This tiny, silent, almost gone puppy who hadn't made a sound, but had screamed louder than any siren. Ember. She didn't bark, she didn't whimper, but she chose to look at him. Just him. Like maybe, just maybe, she believed he could hold on, if she held on too. She didn't bark, she didn't cry. She pressed her forehead to the glass like a child waiting for someone who never came. Ember's silence wasn't weakness, it was awareness, the kind of ancient knowing that even young creatures somehow possess when death is circling nearby. Troy crouched beside the car, his palm flat against the burning metal door, sweat rolling down his back. He could barely look away from her. Every few seconds, her ears twitched, small, subtle flutters, as if she were still registering the world around her. Her eyes blinked slowly, unfocused, but conscious. She was aware. She knew someone was there. That made it worse. He'd already called 911, gave them everything, make, model, license plate, exact location. The dispatcher had sounded calm, detached. "Rescue team is en route, sir. Please don't attempt to break the glass unless the animal becomes completely unresponsive." But Ember was responsive. Barely. She was fading by the second, but she was still fighting. That's what made this unbearable, watching a living soul still trying to survive, and knowing help might not arrive in time. A man in a short-sleeved dress shirt walked by, holding a grocery bag and keys. He slowed for half a second, looked at the scene, then raised his eyebrows. "You're making a scene over a dog?" he asked. Troy didn't answer. "She's going to be fine. Dogs are tougher than they look." Troy looked up at him, jaw tight. "She's a puppy, in a sealed car. It's over 120 degrees in there." The man shrugged. "Not your problem," he muttered and walked away. Troy's knuckles whitened as he clenched the wrench he still held, but he didn't swing it. Not yet. He crouched lower, eyes level with Ember. She had slipped down from the window now, lying on the seat, too weak to stand again. But her eyes found his. Glass between them. Time running out. Another passerby, a woman in yoga pants, paused briefly before saying, "Is that yours?" When Troy shook his head, she blinked, hesitated, then turned away. "Maybe call animal control." "They're coming," he said aloud, mostly to himself, but every second felt stolen. Every breath Ember took seemed slower, and every time someone walked by and kept going, Troy's chest tightened until it felt like a vice. It wasn't just that she was dying, it was that no one else saw it. He glanced at the sky, then back to the car. The sun blazed down. The steering wheel inside was beginning to warp. The dashboard was glistening with heat distortion. The black leather seats shimmered like oil on fire. He looked at her paws again, raw, red from being pressed against the hot glass. Her muzzle twitched, but she didn't lift her head. Troy slid his phone back into his pocket and stood, heart pounding. He circled the car again, trying each door handle. All locked. The rear windows were slightly tinted, but he could still see her, now curled on the floor behind the passenger seat. He took 2 steps back, lifted the wrench again, angled it just right, planning to strike the far back window. If he hit the edge, maybe the glass would fall away from her. "Troy!" A voice snapped him out of it. It was a familiar one. Sam Castillo, a local delivery driver Troy had known for years, had just pulled into the lot. He jogged over, concern on his face. "What's going on?" Sam asked, eyeing the wrench in the car. "There's a puppy locked in there. German Shepherd. She's heat-stroked. Rescue's on the way, but I don't think she's got time." Sam stepped closer to the window, peered in, and sucked in a breath. "Damn, she's not moving much." "She was up before," Troy said, pressed against the glass. "Now she's just lying there." Sam looked back at Troy, voice lowering. "If you're gonna break it, do it now." "I can't," Troy said. "Dispatcher said to wait. If the glass cuts her—" Sam didn't finish the sentence. They both knew the risk. The silence deepened. Troy dropped to one knee again, near the passenger door. "Ember," he whispered, the name now instinct. "Stay with me, just a little longer." Her ear twitched again. Slight, almost imperceptible, but there. That was when Troy felt it. Not panic, not anger, powerlessness. He could rewire a failing compressor in a hailstorm. He could climb into crawl spaces and find leaks no one else could find. But this he couldn't fix. And it was killing him. Sam paced. Troy stood back up and scanned the street for flashing lights. Still nothing. His pulse ticked up another notch. Then faint, he heard it. A distant siren. Faint, then closer, louder, almost real. He turned to Sam. "That's them." "Let's hope they don't miss the turn." Troy ran to the edge of the lot, waving both arms like a madman. The fire truck rounded the corner, horn blaring once to acknowledge him. It pulled in fast, tires screeching. Doors flung open before the engine stopped moving. "She's in the back!" Troy shouted, pointing. "Passenger side, not moving!" The crew didn't waste time. One of them, a stocky woman with a firefighter's helmet tilted back, shouted for the wedge. Another, taller and calm-eyed, placed a hand on Troy's shoulder. "Step back, sir." Troy did, reluctantly. As they got the door open, a wave of heat rolled out so intense that everyone flinched. Inside, Ember lay limp, her fur scorched at the edges. No growl, no whimper. Her chest barely moved. The calm-eyed firefighter bent, reached in, and gently lifted her with both arms. "We've got her." She didn't struggle. Her body sagged like cloth. Troy didn't even notice the tears until they hit his shirt. Because silence shouldn't feel this loud, and no creature should ever have to beg to be seen. Troy could hear his pulse in his ears. He stood 3 feet away from the car, wrench in hand, sweat blurring his vision, heat pressing against his skin like a second layer of clothing. The metal door before him shimmered with heat waves, like it belonged to another reality altogether. Inside, Ember had stopped moving. Her body was slumped across the floor behind the passenger seat. Not collapsed, just settled. Still. Her chest rose, barely, in slow, uneven rhythms. Her paws, once pawing and pleading against the glass, now curled under her like she had folded in on herself. Troy's hand clenched the wrench harder. He could smash it. Right now, the back window was safest. Far enough from her, if he hit the edge, the glass would crack outward. But there were still risks. If it shattered wrong, if it sprayed the cabin, if it startled her and she panicked, if one sharp piece landed wrong... He stood frozen, caught between action and caution. Sam was beside him again, watching. "She's fading fast, man." "I know," Troy said, voice low. He stepped closer, stared through the fogged glass, tried to meet her eyes again. But they were closed now. Not from sleep, he could tell. From surrender. That eerie stillness animals take on when they've been fighting too long and hope begins to leak out through the cracks. Troy lifted the wrench, paused. His arm wouldn't move. And that hesitation, that single second, was when the fire engine finally tore into the lot, wheels screeching, sirens dropping to a wail. Then silence. Red and white lights bounced off the store windows as the vehicle came to a halt. 2 firefighters leapt out. One of them, young, wiry, maybe mid-20s, spotted Troy and didn't wait for instructions. "Backseat?" he called out, already reaching for his tool belt. "Yes." Troy choked out. "Passenger side. She's barely breathing." The firefighter worked fast, sliding a wedge into the top of the door frame and slipping a slender rod through the gap. He jimmied the lock with practiced speed. Beside him, his partner, an older woman with calm eyes and sun-browned skin, readied a thermal scanner and gloves. Within 30 seconds, the lock popped. The young firefighter threw the door open and staggered back as a wave of blistering air escaped the cabin. It smelled like melting plastic and scorched vinyl, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and squeezed your lungs. Everyone flinched. Then silence. Then, from the young firefighter, a sharp intake of breath. "Jesus," he muttered, crouching into the car. "We've got minutes, 5, maybe less." He reached in, gently, then paused. "She's wedged under the seat." Troy stepped forward instinctively, but the older firefighter blocked him with a hand. "Let him do it," she said, not unkindly. The young man worked fast, slipping gloved hands under Ember's frame. She didn't resist, didn't even flinch. Her body was limp, legs dangling. Her tongue lolled slightly, edges dry and pale. He backed out carefully, shielding her head as he moved. The moment Ember left the heat, her body sagged more. Troy watched, frozen. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but his feet wouldn't move. The firefighter turned and said, We've got a van set up for emergencies. She needs fluids now." They moved toward the fire truck, quick but controlled. One of them shouted for oxygen and a cold pack. Another called in an update to dispatch. Troy didn't follow. He stayed where he was, still holding the wrench, still staring at the open car, empty now. The inside looked hollow. Just a scorched leather interior and those paw prints. Still there. Faded now, smudged from the heat, but visible. A language of survival. Sam stepped beside him again. "You okay?" Troy swallowed, voice catching. "I almost waited too long." Sam didn't answer. They watched the rescue team load Ember into the emergency transport unit. An IV was already being inserted, her body laid out on a towel, ice packs being gently placed around her legs. Troy finally dropped the wrench. It hit the ground with a hollow clank. He wiped his palms on his jeans, but the sweat wouldn't dry. He stepped forward slowly, stopping just short of the vehicle. The young firefighter turned and met his eyes. "You called in time?" he said. "Barely. But you did." Troy nodded. "She'll make it?" The firefighter hesitated, then said, "I've seen some pull through worse." But 5 more minutes in that car, her heart would have stopped. No doubt. That sentence hit harder than he expected. Not just because it was true, but because he had known, deep down when he hesitated with the wrench. He knew. She almost died while he stood still. He turned away as they pulled out. The sirens didn't blare this time. They moved fast but quiet. It wasn't until the truck disappeared around the corner that Troy realized he was still standing there, staring at nothing. And in his chest, something unfamiliar twisted. Not guilt, not shame, loss, real, aching, unexpected loss, of something that had never really been his, of something he wasn't sure he had the right to grieve. But that German shepherd puppy, Ember, had looked at him through the glass like he mattered. Like she mattered. And when they took her away, it felt like that connection had been yanked from his hands before he could even understand what it was. He sat down on the curb, chest tight, eyes unfocused. He didn't say a word, but deep inside, for the first time in years, he felt it. He wasn't just watching something slip away. He was afraid of never seeing her again. The double doors of Chandler County Animal Rescue flew open with a soft beep of automatic hinges. Inside, the air was cool and clinical. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every surface gleamed in sterile white or stainless steel. But all Troy saw was the lifeless weight of the puppy in the firefighter's arms. She didn't stir. Not even when they laid her gently onto the padded table in the emergency intake room. "She's not gone," said the older firefighter, urgency cracking through her usually even voice. "She's still with us." The team moved fast. Gloves snapped. 4 bags unhooked from the mobile rig. Monitors flicked on and beeped as clamps were attached. The door swung open again, and in walked a young woman in scrubs, barely older than a college grad, dark hair pulled back into a messy bun, her name tag reading, Jada Lynn, DVM intern. "What do we got?" she asked, voice clipped but focused. "Puppy, 4, maybe 5 months," the vet tech responded. "Locked in a vehicle. Unknown time frame. Severe heat exposure. Possible dehydration. Early cardiac instability." Jada pressed the back of her hand to the dog's ribs and closed her eyes for a moment. "Respiration shallow. Mucous membranes pale. Burn pads," she said as she gently lifted Ember's paws. "She's right on the edge." Troy stood just inside the doorway. No one had told him to stay. No one had told him to leave. So he just stood there, hands clenched into fists, chest rising and falling too fast. "Should I be here?" he finally asked, barely above a whisper. Jada glanced back at him. "You brought her in?" He nodded. I found her. Then don't leave. That small sentence landed heavier than he expected. Troy stepped closer, careful not to interfere. Ember lay motionless, eyes half-lidded, body twitching in small, involuntary jerks as her system battled to stay online. The beeping monitor showed a weak, erratic rhythm. Oxygen was being delivered through a tiny mask strapped to her snout. An assistant inserted the IV into a shaved patch on her front leg. Pulse is thready, Jada muttered. Let's push a bolus of fluids. We need to get that core temp down. They placed ice packs along her abdomen and under her armpits, then laid cooling towels over her back. Troy watched every motion, helpless. The wrench he'd dropped was still back in the parking lot. But this was the real emergency. And there was no tool for it. I should have broken the window sooner, he said to no one. No one answered. Across the room, the heart monitor gave a low, irregular beep. Don't you quit on me, Jada said, almost under her breath. You're not done yet. Then, as she leaned closer, something shifted. Ember's nose twitched, her eyelids fluttered, almost imperceptibly. She moved, Troy whispered, stepping closer. She hears you, Jada said. She's fighting. Another assistant approached with a clipboard. We'll need an intake name. The question hung in the air, blank spaces to be filled. Just another form. Just another intake. Jada looked over at Troy. Did she have a collar? Chip? No. He replied. Nothing. Then what do we call her? Troy looked at the puppy's body, scorched paws, shallow breathing, that slight flicker of movement when she'd heard his voice. A name came to his lips before he could think. Ember, he said, because even when it looks like there's nothing left, she's still burning. Jada nodded. Ember it is. One of the techs jotted it down on the chart. Name, Ember, species, canine, age, approximately 4 months. Status, critical. Troy watched them prepare to transfer her to the isolation recovery unit. They slid a soft blanket beneath her and lifted her onto a gurney with precise, practiced hands. And then it happened. Just before they wheeled her out of the room, Ember opened her eyes. Only slightly, and only for a second. But they met his. Not a blank stare, not confusion, a connection, brief but certain. She knew him, and more than that, she trusted him. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't desperation, it was recognition, a silent, exhausted acknowledgement that said, you stayed. Jada noticed too. She paused, hand on the gurney rail. She looked at you, she said quietly. Troy didn't answer. He couldn't. As they pushed Ember down the hallway, the oxygen tank rolling beside her and the wires trailing like lifelines, he remained behind. Still, silent, eyes locked on the door that had just swung shut. A tech returned a few minutes later, offering him a form. Do you want to provide a witness statement? You're listed as a finder. Troy took the clipboard. Pen in hand, he stared at the blank lines. It felt absurd, putting what had just happened into a few cold boxes. He wrote anyway. When he finished, the tech smiled. We'll update you as soon as we know anything. You did the right thing, Mr. Bennett. He didn't feel like it. He sat in the waiting room, motionless, elbows on knees. People came and went. A family brought in a dog with a torn paw. A man picked up a tabby from spay recovery. The clock ticked louder than it should have, and all Troy could think of was that split second, those eyes meeting his. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a tether, a tiny flickering ember still glowing in the ash. Troy showed up the next morning just after 8 a.m., coffee in one hand, breath tight in his chest. He wasn't sure what he expected. Machines, beeping, maybe even a sheet over her if the night had gone badly. But when the front desk volunteer smiled and said, "She's hanging in there," The relief hit so hard he had to grip the counter. They let him in, past the usual intake area, and through a quiet hallway that led to the back. The recovery room was cooler, softer in tone, and filled with quiet effort, animals healing, and the people helping them heal. Ember was inside a glass front kennel lined with fleece blankets and an IV taped gently to her front paw. The oxygen tube had been removed. She was lying on her side, eyes half closed, but they fluttered open when he stepped in. The second she saw him, her ear twitched. Then slowly, her head lifted just enough to acknowledge him. Troy crouched next to the glass. "Hey, firecracker," he whispered. "You're still burning, huh?" Her nose moved, barely, trying to catch his scent through the barrier. One of the techs, Kayla he'd learn later, opened the enclosure and gestured toward a chair. "You can sit with her for a bit. Just keep it quiet. She's still in early recovery." Troy settled into the chair beside the kennel and placed his hand near her. Ember stretched her neck the smallest inch to rest her chin on his fingers. It was barely a touch, but it was contact. He didn't speak for a while, just breathed with her, counted the steady, stubborn rhythm of her chest rising and falling. Later, he told her a story about how his air conditioner gave out in the middle of last July, and he ended up sleeping on the kitchen floor with a fan blowing over a bowl of ice. Ember didn't move, but when he chuckled at his own misery, her tail twitched once. That became a ritual. Every morning before work, Troy stopped by the shelter. He'd bring little updates, stories about clients, broken compressors, the barista at the gas station who gave him the wrong coffee 3 days in a row. He didn't filter out the rough parts. When he had a hard day, he told her that too. She listened, not like a person listens, not with replies or questions. She just was. Present, still, eyes on him, steady and absorbing, like she was learning the shape of his voice and storing it somewhere quiet. After a few days, she could sit up. A few days after that, she stood, wobbly, uncertain, but stood. The staff moved her to a larger kennel with a half-glass wall facing the hallway, meant for animals stable enough to be near light and movement. Troy found her there one afternoon, sitting near the glass, staring out, not at him, but through him, at something behind him that only she could see. "You okay, girl?" he asked. She didn't react, just kept staring, unmoving. Kayla passed by and said softly, "Sometimes after trauma they fixate. Especially the smart ones. They remember the space where it all started." Troy sat with her in silence for a long time after that. He didn't try to distract her or coax her away from the glass. He just sat, the way someone might sit beside a grave they're not ready to leave. That afternoon, while gently brushing Ember's fur with a donated soft bristle comb, Troy said something he hadn't planned to say aloud. "When I was 9, he began, his voice quiet, "I used to hide in the garage. Not because it was fun, because my dad's truck pulling in felt like a warning bell. I'd crawl behind the lawnmower and wait it out. Count to 100. Then 500. He paused. Ember didn't move, but her head rested heavier on his thigh. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," he whispered. But he did. Because she didn't interrupt. Because she didn't ask him to be okay. Because sometimes, when you think you're saving someone, you realize they're holding something broken in you too. 2 days later, he walked into the shelter and found Kayla grinning behind the desk, holding up her phone. "You've seen this, right?" she asked. He blinked. "Seen what?" She turned the screen to face him. It was a grainy video, wobbly, clearly recorded from across the strip mall parking lot. It showed a fire truck arriving, firefighters jumping out. And then, there he was, Troy, standing beside the car, wrench in one hand, voice frantic. Then Ember, limp in the firefighter's arms. Then, in his, someone had added soft piano music. Words faded in across the screen. She waited, and someone came. The video was titled The Glass Angel. Troy's throat closed. She's viral, Kayla said. 4 million views. People are posting art of her. Kids are writing letters. Someone sent a box of treats with her name spelled out in biscuits. He couldn't speak. That night, when he visited her again, Ember was curled up near the glass wall. When she saw him, she rose, not fast, still slow and stiff, but purposeful, and walked to him. He knelt. She pressed her nose against the glass, and this time he pressed his palm to meet her halfway. They stayed that way for a while, dog and man, glass between them, both remembering the heat and the stillness and the day neither of them was sure would end with breathing. She was recovering, but so was he, and neither of them wanted to miss a single visit. The shelter buzzed with quiet excitement. Phones rang a little more often. A few reporters had stopped by in recent days asking about the puppy from the viral clip. Donations were up. One of the kennels had been repainted. The reception desk now had a basket of dog biscuits labeled Glass Angel Approved. But Troy felt something shift when he walked in that morning. Kayla didn't meet his eyes right away. Jada looked up from her clipboard, her smile hesitant. "She's got a visitor today," Jada said gently. "A family. They drove in from Nevada this morning." Troy nodded slowly, though he hadn't expected the words to hit quite so hard. "For Ember." "Yeah," Jada said. "They've been following her story. Reached out 3 times last week, very interested. Good people, on paper." "On paper," Troy repeated. "She's officially cleared for adoption now. We couldn't hold her any longer. You never submitted the paperwork." "I didn't think I had to," he said. "I didn't think I'd need permission to keep something that already felt like mine." Jada didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The family arrived 10 minutes later, late 30s, polished but warm. The husband wore aviators tucked into his collar. The wife had that glowy skin that spoke of private Pilates and spa weekends, and their teenage daughter clutched a dog toy shaped like a stuffed taco. "We're so thrilled to meet her," the woman said, eyes sparkling. "She's even more beautiful in person." "She's not really a person," the daughter mumbled. "But she is," Troy thought. He didn't say it out loud. They were escorted to the outside meet and greet area, a shaded yard with a few benches and toys scattered across clean gravel. Ember was already there, sniffing around slowly, tail loose, calm but alert. Troy stood in the back, hands in his pockets. The family entered the yard like a coordinated unit. The mom crouched, holding out the taco toy. The dad whistled softly, fingers snapping. The daughter stood a little off to the side, looking at her phone. Ember lifted her head at the sound of the gate opening. Her ears perked. She sniffed, the air once, then twice, and then she did something that made Troy forget to breathe. She looked straight at him. She didn't bark, didn't run. She walked, past the taco toy, past the calling voices, past the outstretched hands. She walked straight to Troy, calm and steady, and sat beside him. Then, with deliberate certainty, she leaned into his leg and rested her chin on his foot. No sound, no performance, just choice. The kind of quiet, grounded loyalty that said, "This is my person." Troy didn't move. Couldn't. His heart was too loud, his throat too tight. The mom lowered her hands, slowly, and smiled with a little sadness behind her eyes. "She's already made up her mind, hasn't she?" Jada nodded from the gate. "Looks that way." The dad let out a low chuckle. Well, it was worth the drive to see something like that. The daughter, for the first time, looked up from her phone and whispered, "That's kind of amazing." The mom turned toward Troy. "We wouldn't dream of taking her from someone she's already chosen. But maybe you should make it official." He looked down at Ember. She blinked slowly, her eyes calm, steady. She wasn't anxious, she wasn't torn. She was home, and she knew it, even if the paperwork didn't say so yet. After the family left, Troy sat with Ember under the tree in the corner of the yard. She didn't curl into him. She just lay close, enough to touch but not cling, enough to say, "I'm here. You're here. That's enough." Gerda joined them later with a folder in her hand. "You know what I'm going to say," she said. "Yeah. She's cleared, healthy. We've done everything we can on our end. Now it's your turn." Troy looked at the folder, then at the dog beside him. "I didn't plan for this." "Neither did she," Jada replied. "But here you both are." He took the folder. Ember didn't even look up. She already knew. The decision wasn't coming. It had been made long before the form was ever printed. And that, Troy realized, was the difference. It wasn't about adoption. It was about belonging. He had never been the one to choose. Until now. The adoption office at Chandler County was quiet that morning. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting stripes across the scratched laminate desk. A soft hum from the ventilation system filled the silence between words no one had said yet. Troy sat in the chair across from the counselor, the folder open in front of him. His name was already printed on the top line. The rest of the form waited blank and expectant. Ember was lying a few feet away on her fleece mat, dozing lightly, her breathing slow and content. The pen felt heavier than it should. "You don't have to rush," the counselor said gently. "But the application's been cleared. She's officially ready." Troy nodded, but didn't reach for the pen. He stared at the page. There were 1,000 reasons to hesitate. He worked long days in a job that sometimes took him across the county. He lived alone in a modest rental that didn't even have a proper backyard. His fridge held more condiment packets than food. He hadn't had a pet in over a decade. His life was routine, controlled, quiet in a way that made sense, even if it sometimes felt like numbness. And yet, every reason to walk away felt smaller than the single one sitting just a few feet away. He glanced at Ember. She was awake now, watching. Not anxiously, not with confusion, just aware. Troy looked back at the paper. His hand hovered over the line. Still, he hesitated. "What if I screw this up?" he said aloud, not to anyone in particular. No one answered, but Ember stood, slowly, deliberately. She crossed the few feet to the desk and paused beside him. Then, with a kind of quiet certainty that left no room for doubt, she lifted one paw and placed it gently on the edge of the desk, half on the paper, half next to his hand. Not clawing, not scratching, just being there. A touch that said, "I'm not waiting to be chosen. I already chose you." Troy stared at her paw, at the small healing cracks on her pads, at the faint discoloration of fur that had once been scorched. And then, without planning it, his throat closed, his eyes blurred. He hadn't cried when he found her in that car, hadn't cried when she was nearly gone in the shelter. But now, with nothing chasing them and no clock ticking down, the tears came anyway. Quiet, sudden, honest. He reached for the pen, signed his name, a signature in black ink that shook slightly at the edges. The counselor didn't speak. She simply smiled and slid a red collar across the desk. Attached to it was a small silver heart-shaped tag. It read, "Ember, rescued and resilient." "She's yours now," the counselor said, officially. Ember lowered her paw and stepped back, tail sweeping once across the floor, slow and sure. Troy stood, still blinking away the sting in his eyes, and crouched beside her. "You already knew, didn't you?" he whispered. She nudged his chest once with her nose. That afternoon, as they left the building together, The sun was high, the wind light, and the parking lot empty. Troy held the leash loose in his hand. Ember didn't pull. She walked beside him, perfectly in step, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. The door hadn't just opened for her. It had opened for both of them, and this time, neither of them would be left behind. 3 months later, the world looked different. Not because of anything dramatic. No parades or headlines, no viral posts or rescue awards, but because the little things had shifted in ways Troy hadn't expected. The rhythm of his life had changed, and it started every morning with the soft sound of Ember's paws padding across the hardwood floor. She was healthy now, stronger. Her fur had grown back fully, thick and golden black, catching sunlight like it was woven from fire. The raw pads on her feet had healed into soft leather again. The light in her eyes wasn't guarded anymore. It was curious, playful, occasionally mischievous. But every now and then, the old weight would return. Not in her body, but in her stillness. She'd trot into the living room, sniffing around like she owned the place. Because, let's be honest, she did. And then she'd pause. Quietly. With purpose. She'd walk to the front window, place her nose gently against the glass, and stare. She didn't whimper. She didn't bark. She didn't tilt her head the way dogs do when they're confused. It wasn't fear. It was memory. Troy would watch from the kitchen, holding his coffee, letting the moment unfold without interrupting it. He didn't always walk over. Sometimes he just let her stand there, connected to a moment only she remembered clearly. A pane of glass, a heat too strong to fight, a long silence where no one came, until someone did. There was one day, just before a monsoon rolled through Mesa, when the sky went orange and the wind picked up early. Troy was tightening the latch on the garage when he turned and saw her at the window, stock still. Her ears were back, her eyes wide but unblinking. He walked inside quietly. "Hey," he said. "It's okay. That was then." She didn't look at him, but she blinked just once. Then she exhaled, soft and steady, and stepped away on her own. It wasn't that she was afraid the past would return. She just hadn't forgotten how much it cost to survive it. At the shop, Ember had become a fixture. Clients asked for her by name. Kids left drawings taped to the wall near the waiting bench. One woman brought treats every Thursday after work, homemade, labeled in small bags with Ember's name on them. One afternoon, a man walked in for an oil change and paused when he saw her curled under the workbench. "Is that the dog?" he asked. "From the internet?" Troy nodded. "That's her." The man crouched slowly, reaching out without touching. "You've got a miracle on your hands." "She's not mine," Troy said automatically. Then paused. "She's with me." It wasn't just a correction. It was the truth. They were still figuring it out, both of them. How to be a pair. How to let someone else be close without bracing for the worst. Some nights, Ember would fall asleep with her head on Troy's boot. Some mornings, she'd refuse to eat until she saw him pick up his keys, like she needed to know he was staying close. Once, during a thunderstorm, she pushed open the door to his bedroom with her nose and curled beside his bed without a sound. She didn't want to be alone in the dark. Neither did he. One evening, as the sun began to drop behind the neighbor's fence, Troy stood in the living room, sipping a beer, watching Ember at the window again. The sky was a deep rose, and her silhouette was outlined in that soft, golden light. She stood there, completely still, just breathing, not searching, not waiting, just remembering. Then slowly she turned and looked at him, just for a second, and that was enough. She walked back toward him, tail wagging in that slow, calm rhythm that no longer asked for reassurance. It simply said, "I'm here, and so are you." He knelt down and scratched behind her ear. "We made it, huh? She licked his hand, curled up on the rug, and closed her eyes. The window was still there. But the story on the other side of it had changed. The local community fair was the kind of event you didn't mark on a calendar, but somehow always remembered to attend. Just a dusty patch of grass behind the fire station, a few booths, folding chairs, and the smell of kettle corn drifting through the air. But for Troy and Ember, it felt like a full-circle kind of day. 3 months since the adoption. 94 days, to be exact, since that breathless moment in the shelter when Ember placed her paw on the table beside his. She walked differently now. Confident. Light. People still recognized her, sometimes hesitantly, whispering to each other and checking their phones. Others just knelt down and looked her in the eye, grateful for something they couldn't quite explain. That afternoon, they sat under the shade of an old cottonwood tree, not far from the Pet Heroes booth, where Ember's framed photo had been placed on the table. Her standing at the glass window, eyes focused, fur still thin from the heat. The caption beneath read, "Still here, still safe, always." A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, approached with slow, thoughtful steps. She had strawberry blonde braids and a sticker-covered water bottle clutched in one hand. "Is it okay if I pet her?" she asked, eyes wide. Troy smiled. She'd love that. The girl sat down cross-legged beside Ember, who sniffed her fingers before laying her head on the girl's small lap, like she'd known her forever. The girl giggled, gently stroking Ember's ears. "She's soft," she said. "And warm." Troy nodded. "Yeah, she is." The girl was quiet for a moment, her hand still moving, then looked up with a seriousness that didn't belong to her age. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." She glanced down at Ember, then back up again. What if someone was locked somewhere, like stuck or left behind, and they thought no one loved them anymore? Do you think someone could still come for them? Troy blinked. The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Not because it was hard to answer, but because it was exactly the question he'd once asked, though he'd never said it out loud. Not as a boy hiding behind a lawnmower, not as a grown man frozen in front of a locked car. He looked at Ember, now dozing peacefully in the girl's lap, and smiled. "Yes," he said softly, "but only if someone is willing to stop and see them." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "That's what she did, huh? She waited, and you saw her." Troy's throat tightened. "Yeah," he whispered. "She waited, and she held on." Later that evening, long after the booths were packed up and the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Troy and Ember sat on the porch of their small house. She was curled beside him, head resting on his thigh, breath slow and steady like the ticking of a trusted clock. Inside, on the living room wall, hung the photo, the one from the rescue. Ember's tiny body framed against the fogged window, paw prints smeared in desperation, hope flickering in her eyes even as the heat pressed in. Below it, in simple block letters on a strip of wood Troy had carved himself, were the words, "Still here, still safe, always." He reached down and stroked the soft fur behind her ear. She leaned into it, just enough. Not long ago she'd been a silent cry in a locked car, a life overlooked, a flame nearly extinguished. Now she was more than a story. She was proof. Proof that someone would come. Proof that no one is too far gone if someone chooses to care. So if you're reading this, or watching her story unfold, ask yourself, what's your story with a loyal pet? Did they save you in a quiet moment? Did you rescue each other without even realizing? If you believe in second chances, in resilience, in the kind of loyalty that stands quietly at your side through everything, support stories like Ember's, share them, live them, and help more glass angels find their way home. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel and be part of something that matters. Because behind every locked door, there might be someone waiting to be seen. And someone like you just might be the one who chooses to stop.